Welcome to Daily Variety, your daily dose of news and analysis for entertainment industry insiders. It's Tuesday, January 13th, 2026. I'm your host, Cynthia Littleton. I am co-editor-in-chief of Variety alongside Ramin Satuda. I'm in LA, he's in New York, and Variety has reporters around the world covering the business of entertainment. In today's episode, we'll hear from Variety's Todd Spangler on the latest wrinkle in the Paramount, Warner Brothers Discovery Netflix saga. Paramount has gone to court in Delaware as it keeps up the fight to buy WBD. And Joe Otterson takes the pulse of WWE 1 year after the grappling franchise moved to Netflix. But before we get to that, here are a few headlines just in this morning that you need to know. Congratulations, Zoe Saldana. You are the highest grossing actor of all time. Avatar, Fire and Ash tipped her over the top. She's been in all 3 Avatar movies to date. Plus, she's been on the Marvel train with the Avengers. And to top it off, she earned an Oscar last year for her work in Emilia Perez. It's good to be Zoe. It's last call for Trevor Noah at the Grammy Awards. The comedian says he'll be back on February 1st for his 6th and final outing as host of Music's Big Night as it airs live on CBS. 2 big European production outfits are in talks to merge some of their assets. Banijay and All3 Media are discussing the possibility of combining in some areas to create a larger overall entity to sell shows around the world. All of these stories and so much more can be found on Variety.com right now. Todd Spangler, thanks for joining me.
Hello, hello.
I don't think we've had a week in probably about 8 weeks where we haven't gone without some big development in the Warner Brothers Discovery, Paramount, Netflix, 3-way tango that is going on despite Warner Brothers Discovery and Netflix reaching a deal in early December. So today here as we speak, it's gone now to a Delaware courtroom where Paramount Skydance has gone to court to seeking to compel Warner Brothers to release more financial details and more granular detail about its sale agreement to Netflix. They're saying, as they have been, that the Warner Brothers Discovery Board is breaching its fiduciary duty by not engaging with Paramount Skydance on their deal. Todd, what do you think is going on here?
Well, first of all, it's a shareholder rights issue, and so the Delaware Chancery Court is the venue that adjudicates these sorts of shareholder disputes. I think there's 2 ways to look at this. One is David Ellison is he's not going to let this go. He wants to see this through. This is part of the process to make his case to Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders that he believes that he really has the better offer that will result in greater value to each individual shareholder. The other way to look at it, right, is that David Ellison just wants to save face, and he's trying to exhaust all of his options here before he goes away.
Reading this complaint, this 60-page complaint, so much of it does hinge on how you define engagement. They're saying over and over in this suit that Warner Brothers Discovery board members simply have been too quick to dismiss Paramount's offers, and the implication there is that they just prefer to be in business with Netflix. And I've talked to some legal types about what leeway does the board have if they just simply are convinced that Netflix is a better steward for these assets. And from what I understand, the financials are most important in terms of those 2 words, fiduciary duty.
I'm not a lawyer, first of all, but Warner Brothers Discovery has been responsive in their filings responding to the Paramount revised offers. They were very detailed. They were trying to show that they were thoughtful and meticulous about vetting each and every aspect of the different offers, including from Paramount.
The other big component of this that has been a consistent theme from Paramount is the valuation of the entire company. Paramount is saying that Warner Brothers Discovery has put way too high of a price tag, of a value, the collection of linear cable channels that as of now are scheduled to be spun off from the larger Warner Brothers Discovery sometime next year. And the Netflix offer, which is around $83 billion, does not include those channels. The Paramount offer, which is valued at a little over $100 billion, does include those channels. And that channel group is everything from CNN and TNT and Cartoon Network to Food Network, HGTV, Discovery Channel. And that matters in terms of taking the measure of the total value of what's at stake here. Tell me if that interpretation is correct.
Yeah, this is not a new argument from the Paramount side. They said if you look at it all in, we are higher than what shareholders would get from the Netflix deal. If the position of Warner Brothers Discovery is that, look, Netflix has a superior financial offer, then you have to impute what is the value of the remnant Discovery Global piece of it. So the Paramount is saying, look, all in, we're at $30 a share. Netflix is less than that. And by the way, with the decline of the stock, it's even less than they advertised before. And on top of all of that, Paramount currently says, hey, based on our comparison to the Versant Group, which is the NBC Universal Comcast spinoff, which the market has driven that stock down. Given these comparisons, Discovery Global is worth $0 per share. So you're getting an even worse deal from Netflix because basically you're getting no value from that piece of the business, which Netflix, again, is not acquiring.
And that matters for Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders in the Netflix scenario because once that spinoff is completed, Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders will have stock in the new company.
Right.
And Paramount is saying that stock is going to be worthless. And so you're better off taking our bigger number and we'll take the whole thing off your hands and everybody will be better off.
So that's the heart of the shareholder lawsuit that they filed. It says, look, how are you valuing this stub, as they call it, in the context of the Netflix deal?
Mm-hmm.
And so they want to compel them to show their homework, if you will.
Right. And Versant Media, which, as you said, is the spinoff of USA Network, Sci-Fi, CNBC, MS Now, and a handful of other channels, that started trading shortly after the first of the year on its own, and it has not performed very well in the marketplace. Now, you hear from the Comcast people that there are some institutional reasons for that, and it may level out. But my thought reading the lawsuit and how many times they refer to Versant is that there are more channels in the bundle that will be spun off from Warner Brothers. This isn't an apples to apples comparison because the Warner Brothers group includes CNN and TNT and HGTV and Food Network, channels that have very different business profiles than some of the NBC Universal channels. Food and HGTV are those type of destination channels that have bucked the linear downtrend a little better than more the general entertainment like the Sci-Fi and USA. So there's a lot of different ways to interpret this. I suppose what matters is shareholders and perhaps a Delaware judge. How do you think the differences in those two channel groups are going to play into however this may be adjudicated in the long run?
I think as a legal matter, the question of how are you valuing this and what are you using to make your decision, that's separate from what is Discovery Global worth relative to Versant. I think those are actually separate questions. The argument after that is that Warner Brothers Discovery is overvaluing Discovery Global relative to an industry peer. So Warner Brothers Discovery has not actually said specifically how much debt they're going to assign with the spinoff before the Netflix sale happens. It's hard you have to make some assumptions on what this is all about. But basically what Paramount wants to do now is like, hey, show us your work, show us what your assumptions are so that shareholders can make an informed decision here on who really does have the better offer.
There's so much to watch here. And I think the other big date on the calendar that we know of is January 21st, which is the deadline for Paramount Skydance's tender offer to Warner Brothers Discovery shareholders. They're going through a different door to try to just buy up as many shares as they can so that they can also have sway over the company. And I think this is one of the things that just makes this also fraught with what if, and I know that is definitely weighing on folks at the studio and HBO. I certainly picked up a little bit of that in my travels over the weekend for Golden Globes.
And Paramount also signaled that they're going to wage a proxy fight to add their own nominees to the board of directors of Warner Brothers Discovery at the annual shareholder meeting. So this is not going to be over anytime soon.
Todd, correct me if I'm wrong. They can't wage that proxy fight unless they get a significant number of shares. They can't just say, we're concerned citizens here, and we're nominating a slate of directors that we think would do a whole lot of better job at Warner Brothers.
They would need a certain number of shares backing that proposal to get it on, the ballot for the general annual shareholders election.
They've got to have some skin in the games. Well, as we've said before, we haven't seen this messy of an M&A fight.
It is shaping up to be a pretty long fight, yes.
Todd, thank you for always rising early to follow all the developments and helping me unpack it. Deeply appreciated.
Yep, never a dull moment.
And now we turn to Joe Otterson, Variety's TV news editor. He walks us through the viewership stats that Netflix assembled to mark 1 year since the WWE brought its traveling wrestling circus to the streamer's platform. It was a test for both entities, and it looks like they passed. Joe Otterson, just back from a very long trip. We're glad to see you back in the saddle.
Yes, it is good to be back.
Right out of the gate, you filed a story that caught my eye. One of the big media stories of 2025 was the WWE moving its very big live franchise to Netflix, and that was a real test of whether Netflix could sustain a live franchise. Would people be trained to go to them for something live at a certain time? And I think by all accounts, the answer is yes. Netflix totaled up a lot of stats and numbers for the first year. As a longtime WWE fan, what do you think is significant about the stats?
According to Netflix, about 1 year since Monday Night Raw launched the weekly live show on Netflix, they drew cumulatively 340 million viewing hours across Netflix. Netflix also has rights to WWE premium live events and their other weekly show, SmackDown, outside the United States, which was another 185 million. So that's, I would say, very successful for Netflix, especially considering this was their first attempt at a consistent weekly live show. Netflix, it's no secret, has ambitions in the live event, programming space. And this, I think, is definitely a success story for them. In terms of the viewership, it's hard to make an apples-to-apples comparison because obviously linear networks like Fox or USA Network, where WWE programming has aired, measure their viewership differently than Netflix does. But according to Netflix, Monday Night Raw is averaging about 3 million views per week, which is pretty well in line with what you were seeing when, say, like SmackDown was airing on Fox a couple years ago now. So I think it's definitely a success for both Netflix and WWE. They just announced that WWE library programming, which they have a ridiculous content library going back 40, 50 years, will be available to subscribers on Netflix as well in the United States for the first time. And I'll be very curious to see what kind of viewership that drives here in the coming weeks and months.
You and Bella Bajaria, too, at Netflix. You anticipated my question, which was, it's hard to make an apples to apples. This is really apples to oranges in terms of viewership. But I do think having their content, which had previously been spread among USA and Fox, and there's still a little bit on CW, but most of its heavy hitting programming now is on Netflix. Even for a franchise that well established, has got to be compelling from a pure marketing standpoint.
Yeah, because a really consistent criticism from fans since the start of the streaming era, if you will, has been how fractured WWE's programming has been amongst these different platforms. Because you have to remember, there was the WWE Network for a time, then that was integrated into Peacock, and then obviously they've made other deals since then and stuff moves around, and you could get the library stuff on Peacock or the live events, but then if you wanted to watch Raw or SmackDown live every week, it was a question of having different networks or different streaming services. So just the fact that there is one place for a big portion of their content now, including the weekly live shows, is a really big deal for fans.
For sure. Do you feel like WWE is as ubiquitous as ever? Anytime you move a platform, even a ginormous platform like Netflix, there's a sense of, are you going to potentially break something? What is your perspective as a fan?
Yeah, it's interesting because WWE is one of those things where it's such a consistent presence in the pop culture landscape and has been for so long. Like anything else, it really ebbs and flows, but it's always there. Like definitely there was this period a couple years ago where you had this incredible like crossover appeal of stars like Roman Reigns and Cody Rhodes and Rhea Ripley and all these people who are all still active wrestlers today, but just when they were really entering their prime period and you were seeing them pop up across different media and pop up in movies and on different TV shows, and just their names were being spoken outside of kind of those traditional wrestling circles. That was really, really cool to see. And that was a new era for the company. And now they entered this Netflix era, and they're, again, still figuring out things in the streaming age and this new platform they're on. It's a very, very well-oiled machine. That's the last of the great traveling circuses. And it's just a question of identifying those up-and-coming stars then in that new generation and just keeping things moving that way and getting them to work with the more established talent and constantly building up people and building up these programs and these storylines.
Have you seen any embellishments or augmentation of the content that has impressed you?
They're not as confined like by time restrictions as they were, obviously, because, with a cable network, a linear network, okay, you have like your block of time and you really can't move too far like outside of that. Like if you're programming for 3 hours, you have to give them 3 hours. And if you can't really go over, but you also can't really go under. And I think what they've very smartly done is they've been able to scale things back a little bit and say, okay, tonight's going to be a 2.5 hour show or 2 hour and 15-minute show. But then sometimes if you need to go a little longer because a match is going really well and the audience is really into it or it's flowing in a certain way, you're not as confined in that sense. So it's given them a greater sense of freedom in that sense. In terms of the technology integrations, they'd already been experimenting with some things in terms of like the way they use their cameras and like integrating drone shots and things within the stadium or the arenas, which has been really cool. Under the leadership of Paul Levesque, a.k.a. Triple H, a.k.a. The Game, they've really been trying out some new things and kind of trying to break the mold from what they've been doing for a long time. Some of it's worked, some of it hasn't, but the stuff that has worked has been really cool, and it's good to see them integrating that more and changing the way the product is presented.
Are there any big events, anything you're looking forward to this year for WWE?
It all depends on the storyline. Some of the storylines are going to play out much differently depending on how things happen during the year. The person I'm keeping an eye on right now is Gunther, a.k.a. Der Ringgeneral. For those who don't know, he's an Austrian wrestler, very, very impressive guy. He's the one who wrestled John Cena in his retirement match in December, and they've just really positioned him as this monster heel or bad guy in wrestling terms off of that. The fact that he was the one who got to work with Cena in his final match and retired John Cena and made him tap out was a huge deal for him. And I'm very, very curious what they're going to do with him here out, because he's currently positioned as pretty much the top bad guy in the company.
Jawohl is the German word that comes to mind. Joe, thank you so much for being our resident WWE expert. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
As we close out today's episode, here's a few things we're watching for. It's hard to believe, but Q4 earnings season is just about upon us. Netflix will kick off the reporting a week from today on January 20th with its numbers for the last quarter of last year. Of course, we'll be listening for any news on its Warner Brothers Discovery acquisition deal. Also hard to believe, but the Sundance Film Festival is barely a week away. This will be the last event in Park City, Utah before the festival moves to Boulder, Colorado in 2027. It will also surely be a time for tributes to the Sundance Institute's late founder, Robert Redford. Before we go, congrats to Katie Anderson. The Sony Pictures alum has joined Black Bear Pictures as Executive Vice President of Acquisitions. This appointment is also coming just in time for Sundance. Thanks for listening. This episode was written and reported by me, Cynthia Littleton, with contributions from Todd Spangler and Joe Otterson. Sticks, Nicks, Hick Picks. Please leave us a review at the podcast platform of your choice, and please tune in tomorrow for another episode of Daily Variety. And don't forget to tell us what you think at podcasts@variety.com. Thanks.